Well, today is the second to last Sunday that we are centering ourselves and our liturgy and our story in the prophets. And I kind of expect you all to cheer a bit when I tell you this. Today's the second to last Sunday of our series, How Long, O Lord, on the 12 minor prophets. And I'll be honest with you, it has been a bit of a mixed review from y'all from the beginning of this series. Some of your comments, your feedback, well, it's been kind of all over the map about this series. For those of you who are maybe joining us for the first time today, let me bring you up to speed. For the last 2.5 months, we've been walking with and through what our Jewish siblings and faith would call the Book of the 12. The 12 minor prophets, the last 12 books of the Old Testament. And you remember the minor prophets aren't minor because they're less important. They're minor because they've got the gift of brevity. They're short. And not all of us have that gift. And they've wrapped up, our Jewish siblings have wrapped up into one ancient scroll, these 12 prophets, and they call it the Book of the 12. And like I said, through this series, your comments and your feedback have been kind of all over the map. And so I figured I would share with you some of the comments, some of the feedback that's kind of stuck in my mind over the last 2 months that I have heard from y'all, some from staff, some from you all. And so here are some of the comments that have stuck out to me. So here's one. So this Sunday is the last Sunday of the Black Lives Matter Politics of Jesus series, isn't it? Can we move on yet? That was one of the comments I got. I'm not going to name any names. No names mentioned. Someone else said, I was really weary and skeptical at first, because when I think of the prophets, I think of Miss Cleo infomercials. But after hearing the story, I've kind of engaged in this whole new way, and I feel like for the very first time, I'm beginning to be able to tell this story myself. See, mixed reviews. Another person said, it's all so dark and condemning. When do we get back to the sweet and the nice and the loving Jesus? When? Newsflash, Jesus should never be described as nice. But that's a whole nother sermon series, right? Once again, not naming any names. One particular worship leader and his wife, not naming any names, said, seriously, how many times do we have to sing this song? How long, O Lord? For 12 straight weeks, Michelle, really? How long, O Lord, till we shoot this song out of its misery? Not naming any names. So, and then there was another person. Another person said, you've motivated me. You've motivated me now to kind of hunker down and read the minor prophets. That's a pastor's dream come true when she hears that. You've motivated me to actually read the Bible for myself. And for the first time, I recognized, wow, I love this faith so much. I'm excited to be a Christian. I get it. And then still another one of you said, to be honest, the whole series just makes me nervous. And so I give you this feedback. You've given me this feedback, and so I give it back to you as the body, just to kind of maybe call our minds and our hearts to the fact that we have mixed feelings and mixed reviews about this time and this season with the prophets. And that might be just right. The prophets, they kind of have this way of always being met with mixed reviews. And ever since the very beginning, when they first came among us, preaching their words of both condemnation and hope, they were met with mixed reviews. Some people had their hearts inflamed by God's justice and thought, finally, this is the kind of theology I can get behind and I can live into. And other people just yawned, right? Yawned and maybe screamed and thought, when will this be over? Some people wondered when the prophets would stop doing those strange things they always did and stop speaking those strange things they're always speaking. When are they going to stop? And other people felt like for once, I finally get it. I finally get it, and I can engage more deeply now. I know God different and better now. The prophets have always been met with mixed review. So we're in good company. We're in good company, friends, right where God's people have always been with the prophets. But with those mixed reviews, you might be wondering, why read them then? Why are they still around? Why are they in the Bible? Why do preachers still preach from them? Why do we have to still wrestle with these prophets? And I think it's really simple, actually. It's really simple. There's only one reason why the prophets have remained all these centuries, and the simple reason is this. Are you ready? You ready to know? You know, lean in with me? Lean in a little bit? I'll let you know. The prophets are the memory of God's people. The prophets are the functioning memory of God's people, both in their words and in their lives. They are the functioning memory of God's people. You may have noticed that there's kind of one word that all of the prophets' sermons kind of hinge on. Like, not always stated, but whether explicitly stated or implied, there's this one word. And it's remember. That's the sermon that the prophets preach, remember. The prophets really just have one sermon, and that one sermon hinges on this one word, and they preach it everywhere they go, whatever city they find themselves in, and it's compact and it's portable and it's the one sermon, and the prophets stand up wherever the people of God are, and they preach this sermon. Remember. Pre-exile, God's people took a look at all the destruction around them, everything falling down, their enemies approaching, life being destroyed around them, and the prophets stood up with imminent doom surrounding them and said, remember. Before all hell breaks loose, remember. First, remember what happens when you forget God. And second, remember that no matter what, God will be with you. In the midst of exile, when all the chips are down and life is completely lost and hopeless, maybe better stated, in the midst of right now for us, in the midst of pandemic, when all the chips are down and life is completely lost and hopeless, the prophet stands on the rubble heap of exile and starts that sermon all over again. Remember. Remember that even though creation was nothing, God made you from dust, and God will do it all over again. There is no tomb too empty for God to bring back to life. Remember, says the prophets. And then, of course, the prophet we center on today. The prophet that you heard Sean read from this morning, Zechariah. Zechariah is a minor post-exilic prophet, which means he speaks after exile, one of the last 12 books. And in the time of Zechariah, God's people have been wiped out, and they've known destruction, and God is now bringing them back into the promised land. And the prophet steps up into his prophet pulpit again, yet again, and says again, preaches the same sermon again. Remember. Remember. And so today I'm going to tell the story. As the prophets want me to do, I'm going to tell the story, and I'm going to help you remember today. Maybe that's what you need. Maybe that's what you need more than anything else right now, is to remember the story, to remember who God is, what God has done, and what God is still doing. Maybe you need to hear the story again so that you can begin to remember and begin telling that story yourself. And here's the story. Here's the story that Zechariah would have you remember today. In the beginning, there was just chaos. Everything was just a mess. Scripture uses this phrase, tohu abohu, which just means utter chaos. In the beginning, there was utter chaos, and God's Spirit, though, began speaking to the chaos and hovering over it and ordering all of creation until creation was so ordered that life began to burst forth from it. And God separated the light from the dark and the dry land from the seas. And every day God looked upon creation and called it good. It's right. It's so right. Everything in creation had a place. Everything from the things that flew to the things that swam to the things that crawled to the things that walked on the earth. Everything pleased God. It was right. It was tov. It was as it should be. And then in what can only be described as this moment that would be called divine inspiration, God has an idea. God is going to make a special type of creature. This creature will have in its bone and in its flesh all the elements of creation. It will be an animal born of the earth, but it will also have the Spirit of God within it. It will share in the image of God itself. And so God took some dust from the earth and fashioned it in God's hands and breathed upon it. And you were born. Now you remember that you only had one job. Your only job, my only job, our only job was to help tend to creation, to see the goodness that's inherent in all of creation, to see it through God's eyes, that it's right, that it's just right as it should be. Our job was to see that and to tend to that goodness, to be overwhelmed by the majesty of an ant and blown away by the beauty of friendship, and to join God in delighting in that and tending to that. You remember that was your job. And then you also remember that we forgot that job. We neglected our friendships, and we walked right by and right over creation until creation began to break and fracture, and there were divisions all over creation between human beings and one another, between brothers and sisters and mothers and child, and creation was once again just a total mess. Tohu abohu, chaos. And this is when the story gets interesting, though. God looks down upon creation, and though we forgot our job, God did not forget the beauty and the goodness inherent in creation. God didn't forget it. God did not forget us and our place and our role. God didn't forget. And so instead of forgetting us or giving up on us, God decides to do it again. Only our God would do that. God decides to create. And God creates this time a special people who will exist right in the middle of all the chaos. And they will be called the children of God, the people of God. It starts with this one man named Abraham. God says to Abraham, I will heal you until your healing just spills out into the world, and I'm going to bless you with so many children who will be my children, and they will be as numerous as the sands in the sea, and they will be all over creation, healing a broken world until their healing and their wholeness, it fills all the world again. And we're going to call that shalom. And you will have it, and you will share it for God's sake and for the sake of the world. God didn't forget God's promise, and sure enough, before long, Abraham's children are plentiful, and they're filling creation and seeing to the healing themselves until all of creation is healed around them, and they're joining in the goodness of God's creation, remembering their way back into covenant with God again. And then you know the story of the earlier prophets. At some point, other armies and nations from other seas came in and took them captive and drug them off into lands that they didn't belong in and cut them off from their vocation. They forgot who they are. They forgot who they were, and chaos, tohu abohu, broke in all over again. And you remember that they were scattered, and God took care of them even when they were scattered and under oppression from other people, and God was still there. And now today in Zechariah, they're coming home. That's the story of Zechariah, as they're coming home. God has remembered the promise, and the promise was simply this: not just that they would be God's people and that God would be their God, but that they would have a place, a home base from which they would be able to heal the world. Not in isolation, not cut off, not being special, but they would have a home. The epicenter of healing and restoration for all the world. And the center of that home was a temple. They would build a temple that would become the meeting place for God and God's people. And heaven and earth would meet there and kiss. And this is where the prophet Zechariah stands to preach that same sermon yet again. You may notice over the last 11 weeks that the prophets are not above repeating themselves, or each other for that matter. And that might be because our lives repeat themselves. They are the living memory of God's story. The prophet Zechariah takes the pulpit in the temple, and he begins that sermon yet again. Did you hear it today as Sean read? Thus says the Lord, says Zechariah, I have not forgotten my people. Remember, though all the chips seem to be down, I have loved you from the beginning, and I still have a special work for you to do. And so I am gathering you back, my beloved. Remember that. Remember that I've met you in exile, that I have never let you be by yourself or destroyed completely. Remember that. And while you're rebuilding a new life together, Remember who I am. The God who has never forgotten you. And remember why you're here. Remember why you're here. Remember your vocation of healing creation until it's all whole. Do that. Do that by telling each other the truth. Love each other enough to at least tell each other the truth. Love each other enough to join together in the vocation of being people of justice and peace until healing breaks out across the world. Zechariah stands in the promised land and proclaims these words of remembrance in the place, let's be honest, a place where it's maybe the most easy to forget. There's this sort of amnesia, right, that sets in the midst of comfort in the promised land where we forget God, forget who we are, but friends, we're not in the promised land right now. It feels like we are far from it right now. More than ever, we must remember. Remember, says the prophet Zechariah. And when you remember, through building your lives of disciplined faith, when you remember, the nations will be compelled, and those people who you thought were your enemies will come near you and say, we notice among you a peace that we envy. Take us, show us the ways of peace. Remember the God who has always delivered you and who has never forgotten you. Remember to build lives of discipline and peace and justice. Remember. And then that's where the Old Testament ends. And next time we hear the word remember, friends, it's from another prophet who gathers his disciples around a table. And he says, now I want you to take this, and I want you to eat this, and I want you to take this cup, and I want you to drink this cup. And when you do it, for God's sake, remember. Remember. Whether you are in exile and your life is falling apart, whether you see enemies approaching all from every side and you see no way out, or whether you are about to rebuild your life in newness and peace, do it. Do it in remembrance of me. Remember. This is why, even as online worship gets harder and harder, as it's so tempting to disengage, this is why you keep coming to tune in here, even when it's not the same, even when you're tired of it, because this is the place of remembrance, friends. And this is why you love it so much, moves you so much to participate in, to remember and celebrate a baptism of another small saint like Margie, who's being baptized today at the park. This is why you love to gather around water and watch God receive someone like Margie into God's covenantal family. That's why it stirs within you to remember your own baptism as you feel the sprinkle of water on your own skin. This is why at baptism something deep in us is stirred, because in moments like this, it's like the divine memory becomes realized in us and we remember. When we gather around the font and when we taste the bread and wine, oh, how I want to taste it with you again. We remember the God who claims you and the life that calls you. And so today, saints, As we wrap up our series on the prophets, we get really close to wrapping it up as Zechariah steps out of the pulpit and we get ready to hear prophet number 12, Malachi, next week. I wonder where you are in this story. Are you currently in a place of fear, dreading the destruction of exile that may be to come? That you expect to come in your life? Or are you in a place of exile right now with your life in complete disarray? Or are you in a place of rebuilding and reconstruction where life is joyful and good? I wonder where you are in the grand story of God, and I wonder as we gather today in this holy space, what do you need to remember?
Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, and your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we have also forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours, now and forever. Amen.
I sought the Lord, and he answered me. He delivered me from my fears. I sought the Lord, and he answered me. He delivered me from my fears. I'm not scared here. I'm not scared here. I'm not scared here. I'm not scared.